So that got it?
Yep.
Yep.
Perfect.
Right, for a couple of minutes.
I should have put that round to scaling Horizon Cloud, but it made more sense to me say Horizon Cloud scaling. So.
Don't stop thinking it now.
Yeah, I
know. Distracting yourself. And Gareth, well done for shutting off the chat during lunch.
Oh, what?
Well done for shutting down the recording of the chat during lunch.
Oh, yeah. I'm not that. You got to remember, I've got to edit all that, so I don't want an hour's worth of people just.
Yeah. Morgan was asking actually when sessions will be up.
Sorry, who was asking?
Morgan was asking.
I'm a bit reliant on Zoom, but my hope is if they're ready to download. Now I now have a 1 gig internet connection, so I'm not waiting for the download. I'll start editing them maybe this evening.
Yeah, rub it in, Gareth. Come on.
I feel like I'm part of the 21st century at last. It's like, yes, I have internet.
The gateway to the rest of the country has opened.
Well, again, it's like all or nothing around here. Like I think I joked last time, there's a company who are waiting for the council to sign something off, and they're on about putting 10 gig to the houses around here. Like, why do you need 10 gig? And I'm like, I don't care, but I'll have it.
Yeah, Gareth, I'm only on a gig as well, so.
It's nice. It's like, wow, it's gone from like shoestring to I can actually stream something in 4K.
But it's fiber to the premises in the countryside with low latency.
Yeah.
Why would you live in a town?
It was Andy's joke. He said that, and that's why I'm quite happy to have access to the lab, because it's on a gig now. But if they upgrade the Barrett, it'll be on 10. So I'm sure he'll be doing folding at home and God knows what else on there.
Well, if you're going to pay for electricity, it'd be rude not to.
I can see the next session coming up for just Gareth showing all his speed test screenshots. Right, so we're pretty much at 2 o'clock. So Michael, over to you.
Thank you. Hi. Sorry if I cough parts through this. I'm recovering from COVID at the moment, so still have a bit of a slight chesty cough, but apologies for that part way through. So presentation today is all about Horizon Cloud and scaling, and this kind of came out of a project that we were doing recently. So as I said there, I'm Michael Young. I work as part of the North EMEA PSO team. I've been with VMware for around 3.5 or so years now, primarily working in digital workspace, so focus on Horizon on-premise, in the cloud, and all of its associated byproducts such as app volumes and DEM and things like that, workspace one access. So we'll be talking about scaling Horizon Cloud for this particular topic. I've put a small agenda together, really covering off excuse me, things around what the customer requirements were and how we needed to go about thinking of a scaling approach. So what were the elements we needed to consider? So I've kind of listed those out here in terms of the subscription resource groups, IP addressing, so on and so forth. You can ask questions during the presentation, but I've allowed a little bit of time at the end to go through some Q&A should you have any questions or want to delve deeper into certain aspects. So without any further ado, so what the customer was looking to achieve with Horizon Cloud was initially just to replicate their application testing for the user base they have, and this was needed to be done virtually. So originally we didn't need to think about scaling, it was only 200 users or so, but what we then quickly understood is they want to expand this requirement to encompass their standard Office users. And they went, oh yeah, by the way, we kind of like what you're doing, but can we now add 25,000 users to this piece of work? And we went, yeah, that's great, we can do that. But this then let us sit back and kind of consider, well, how are we going to best approach this design? Because we're going beyond our normal constraints, if you like, in terms of a delivery, because there's not many implementation we've done where we go beyond the 2,000 kind of level for the Horizon Cloud at present. So that kind of led us into a scaling approach. How are we going to look at this? So we went and asked them some rudimentary high-level requirements that we thought we needed to determine within inside the approach to scaling this to work with inside Horizon Cloud. And once we had those rudimentary requirements, it kind of led us to break it down into 5 key points, if you like. So as I mentioned, the 2000 VMs per or sessions per subscription. Now that's not really a restriction per se from VMware. This is more of an API limit in terms of how it can only support 2000 VMs in the subscription or 2000 sessions, purely because of the way that the code talks back into the cloud, and you've got to wait for things to happen. So it's kind of limited to that level of 2000. Next iteration, we should be able to go a bit further than that, but that's something to come in the future. Now, VNet and subscription creation, you do really need to think about these. If you're going for a very easy standard deployment, okay, we're going to do a POC, then you don't need to tend to worry about it, because it will deploy it for you as you deploy out Horizon Cloud on Azure. But I would say it's more advisable to sit back and do that VNet and subnet creation yourself. It's a lot more control, saves you going back and doing a bit of work later. At the time we were doing this, we were unable to expand pods and subnets. So again, it's another reason why we need to think about our VNet and subnet creation. And it's purely to do with the fact that when we brought out the manifest 2298, we were able then to add additional VNets and subnets that we could then peer, that you could present back into the Horizon Cloud environment. Again, it is kind of a band-aid approach to something you haven't probably configured properly at the beginning. So I would always think of it as you can't expand pods and subnets, and think about creating it correctly in the first place. And then when you've got a multi-pod environment, you can't reuse names. So again, leads to scaling approach. How's that going to affect in terms of naming? Because it's kind of a flat file structure, the things you need to think about in terms of what you can't name are things like images, farms, VDI desktop assignments, things like that. So again, excellent time for thought about planning and naming. And then the final piece, which doesn't always ring true with everybody, is around security. So we have the option where for UAGs for external access, we can deploy them into a separate VNet. However, this customer wants to go one step further and use a subscription as that security boundary to allow another layer of complexity into the environment and segregation as well. And you can go into another piece around NSGs on top of the VNets and stuff like that, but that's a subject probably for another day in terms of creating security. So hence, those were our kind of 5 areas that we needed to think about to put this design together. So we thought about, well, how are we going to plan to build this thing out? We need to think about what it's going to look like and how we're going to manage it. So our first point of call was management groups. Now, you don't necessarily need these, especially if it's a smaller environment. It's kind of, these are to really segregate administrative privileges at the higher level. So another requirement that we had to consider when we did this implementation was we needed Azure Active Directory domain services, purely because we didn't have access to the on-premise domain services. That wasn't going to be able to come later. So we built this environment with AADDS and then siloed that off so that we could create the relevant security groups for that side. And then we have our Horizon pod management. So the Horizon admins could manage everything below that. Then we needed to think about subscriptions. This is used to meet the customer requirement for the current sizing limit. So subscription, 2000 VMs or sessions per subscription. So that set out how many subscriptions we're going to need to require to meet the number of use cases to be delivered. And then obviously we then need resource groups, and these are obviously the containers to contain the relevant VMs for that piece of work. And as you can see there, hopefully we've got, multi-pod sessions, UAGs, things like that, how we're going to segregate those out. So it kind of then splits out the planning an awful lot easier for you once you have that element set by. And the next thing you need to think about is whether you need to take into account tenants, because they will also bring in another level of planning that you need. So the diagram that I've got here is kind of a very small subset of what we went to look to deploy in the customer's environment. So we started off with a production tenant. We also needed to have an application tenant. We also needed to provide a testing tenant and a pre-prod tenant, and so on and so forth. And we had to think about how we're going to name this structure. The first element is obviously the tenant. Very simple. We've got production, we've got test, we've got pre-prod, we've got application. So naming was fairly simple for that bit. It kind of got a little bit more difficult when we came to the subscriptions. So we kind of came up with this naming convention to abbreviate kind of where you were at, where you're looking to work within, and the elements that were going to be deployed within inside each of those areas. So the same with the resource group and the VNets and the subnets. We kind of thought about this naming pattern so that we could replicate each of these independently across each of the different tenants, and each tenant would have a name pattern fairly similar, and they would replicate against what that tenant was it was sitting in. So as you can see here, the main considerations are for if you're running up a desktop pool, you need 2 subnets, and when you're running up a UAG pool, you need 3 subnets, and it's purely because of the way that the Horizon Cloud is deployed into the platform. So we wanted to make this, again, the next step was a kind of like determining an IP addressing approach, because we didn't want the customer just to ram in different IP addresses here, there, and everywhere, and us trying to work out, okay, well, that subnet range can fit in here, and that subnet range can fit in there. So our plan was to take a single CIDR range within the environment, a /20, and then subdivide that out. So what that looked like is what we have here. Our /20 were then divided into 4 /22s, which we then cut across planes, Horizon Cloud control planes, to deliver the number of IP addresses that we required to then meet the customer's deliverable. So this should give us the scope to build up to our 25,000 users that we needed to deliver with inside the customer's environment. And then finally, we can't forget that we need to peer a lot of these VNets together, because we've created all of this manually. No traffic will flow between any other VNet without you actually setting up any peer groups. So you need to understand what parts of the design need to speak to other parts of the design. So in this instance, all of our desktop pools or VNets need to speak to our core ADDS environment, purely because that's where all of the pod managers are and other relevant elements of the design, such as Azure file stores for DEM and things like that. And then finally, we needed to add in the layer where our UAGs are able to communicate back to the relevant desktop pool to allow a user to get access to assigned environments, be that virtual desktop, RDS, or WVD type session. There's a lot more VNet peering involved in it than this, but this is kind of a simplified flow just to show you that you need to consider these elements too. And this can get quite complex depending on who needs to talk to what and where. But that kind of gives you the basics to start with. And we then needed to kind of provide resiliency into the environment. And this is where we took our cloud control planes and then split out the environment. So initially we had UK South to deploy into, but they wanted the option to be able to still facilitate user access in the event that UK South was unavailable. So we then brought in UK West and then split out the environment associated in exactly the same manner as UK South. So you can see here from Pod A and Pod C, we have slightly less IP addresses that we can use or users that we can present, purely because we're having to factor in all of the management elements as well. Whereas obviously when you look at Pod B and D, we have the full range of 8,000 IP addresses or users that we can assign. So when you add all those together, we can provision around 28,000 plus usable IP addresses for the environment. Because we're talking WVD here, we don't necessarily need a full 28,000 IP addresses, because obviously we're looking at provisioning instances that users go onto. But essentially what we're showing here is that, be that WVD or a standard Windows 10 VDI VM, we can still accommodate that number of users. So what we then needed to think about is how we're going to take the expandability of this beyond where we're at. So initially, obviously, it was around, as I say, 2,000 users. So this is where we kind of use the control plane to meet the expandability. So as we needed additional capacity, we just add another pod to the control plane. And this gave the customer great flexibility, including the option at a later date to include some on-premise environments that they had. So they could bring those in and still allow access via this mechanism for users to access desktops, be they in the cloud or on-premise. It gave them quite a unique use case that they hadn't really considered before. But that kind of brought a big question around from them, was like, well, how are they all going to access this? Because at the moment they're talking to different FQDNs, different access methods. We need lots of other technology involved. So, excuse me, we talked about the universal broker. And the advantages that this brings is the single FQDN access for them. So we have this element within inside the universal broker that allows us to integrate all of the pods together through one access URL. So what this does really is eliminate the need for cloud pod architecture within inside an environment. And also, in addition, when you bring in the universal broker, because you're removing cloud pod architecture, you're reducing the need for east-west traffic, because essentially what this is doing is providing the user with a single FQDN. It then looks at all of its assignments across every pod that it can see, and then picks the one that it thinks is the closest to that user, and then presents that desktop out. So we're removing the requirement for global server load balancing. We're also introducing a more optimal performant connection to the desktop for the user. And because, excuse me, because the universal broker uses resources from the assignments, it's only really looking at assignments within there and not looking at individual pods as such. So it just looks at the assignment, where are those assignments associated to, and then delivers you the desktop that's credited to that. One limitation here is that you can only have 5 groups to a single user. Generally not too much of an issue, but it depends how big your environment gets to, because obviously you need to consider that when you're deploying the assignments, that you set them up correctly, so that no matter where you have a failure, the user is always able to get a desktop delivered to them in the event of that failure occurring. So that's the only kind of small caveat to that. That's the 5 assignment group limit. Oh, well, we also needed to include workspace one access into this, purely because they wanted to deliver the entitlements via the workspace one hub catalog. So what we did was also include the workspace one access connector into the core element of their subscription. Again, trying to give them that single user activity, single user FQDN, so that you've got one place to go, but giving them added benefit around essentially adding policies that can be added to authentication mechanisms. So we can add layers of conditional policies to how a user gets in. So depending on where they are, what access device they're connecting from, we were able to deliver a more secure access point, as opposed to just going through the universal broker, because workspace one access kind of integrates with the universal broker. So you sit that above the top of the universal broker. The user authenticated, he then gets the connectivity to the universal broker. He then goes and looks at all the assignments you have, and then represents up to you the entitlements that you're then available to, and then wraps over the security over the top of that. So they were really happy with this, because it gave them a single pane of glass, if you like, from where to start from. So essentially, this was what is a cut down version of what we eventually presented to the customer. So as you can see here, we have that workspace one layer in at the top that presents the URL to the customer or to the end user. They then go pass through to the Horizon Cloud, which then looks at where they're going. It kind of looks at their entitlement and then presents down, as you can see here on the right, the relevant pod that they need to get access to present out the desktop. And then you can see in the on-premise section is where we're eventually going to be adding in connectivity to their on-premise AD, so we can do proper or do a full authentication against their existing AD accounts later on in the future, once that connectivity is in place. So in conclusion, what we ended up doing was, so we could get the scale that they wanted, we needed to think about the provisioning ahead to meet the demands that that customer required in terms of scaling not just to the initial 25,000, but eventually to the 125,000. And providing the ability to do that was to look at the delivery mechanism in terms of how we build out Horizon in the cloud. So it's more around the Azure development for that than the Horizon cloud, because that part's fairly simple. You just have to think about, okay, tenant, subscription, resource group, VNet, subnet, and once you've got that in, there's your ability to scale. So the customer's exceptionally happy with that work that we did around their Azure piece, which they didn't really take into account. And then finally, high availability, wrapping in the universal broker and a workspace one access gave us that fundamental building platform to present out to the customer the fact that we can make this highly available using our multi-cloud assignments. Doesn't matter where your user accesses the environment from, they will always get access to a desktop or a session, and that will be delivered in a more performant manner. And the universal broker will try and find the closest assignment to that geographical location that the user is sitting in to give the most performant access that they need. And then finally, the 25K and beyond, we express to them how, when they implement their IP address ranges, to look at using CIDR ranges as the starting point for the Horizon Cloud deployment, so that if they need to scale beyond the 25,000, each 25,000, in this case, obviously we can demonstrate 28,000, but for each 25, in essence, you take another IP CIDR range, and that will give you the scale to go to 25, 50, 75, 100, and so on and so forth. And we can then wrap all those back in through the universal broker and workspace one access to continually deliver that single FQDN, no matter how large you want to grow this environment. And finally, what I've done is I've put some key reference points in here to really direct you to where you need to have a look at in terms of why you would have a 2000 VM limit, why we don't expand subnets, multi-cloud assignments, how you use them, how best to set them up, what are the limitations when you do that, and how you can get around them. But the real core one here is the Microsoft Azure requirements checklist. Now, if you start with that and you work your way from the top to the bottom, you should never really get yourself into a position where essentially you've got to take everything that you've done, destroy it, and start again. Because believe me, I've been there, I've done it, or I haven't really followed the checklist. I've got it halfway through and gone, that doesn't work. And in Azure, you can't just change things. You have to take it out and put it back in again, which is an awful lot of work. So always best to go through that element first before you do on anything else. And finally, perhaps a key one here that not many people are aware about, but the Azure firewall doesn't really support persistence because it's how is it built? I can't remember the exact reason why it can't do it. Something to do with the way that it's split across the Azure infrastructure. It can't give you, for UAG this is anyway, if you're running the UAGs externally to get access, it never really forwards the originating IP header. So when the UAG receives the response coming in, it only gets the Azure firewall IP address. And therefore, if anyone's done UAG work before, you need the two protocol channels to be going through the same UAG. It's not able to do that because it doesn't get that originating IP address. So it can't determine who you were originally. It thinks everybody is the Azure firewall. So you need to think about looking at either using Azure Front Door or the application gateway. So you can use X-forwarded for headers that will present out that originating source IP address and then deliver the user to the correct UAG each time to keep that path alive. And with that, I'm at the end, so open to any questions.
Michael, I'm going to ask you one. Sorry if I missed it at the beginning when I ran and grabbed a drink, but what about image management and consistent images across regions, or dare I say even data centers? You know, you might want to keep an image consistent across on-prem and Azure. Do you see any challenges there?
You can, well, obviously we can use the Microsoft Marketplace for images, and that's where we recommend most people start, because the images that are presented through there for Horizon have already got the relevant DAS agents within them and its optimized image. You can also bring in your own image, but you do have to do an awful lot more work around getting that optimized and the right DAS agents in the correct order, and then publishing it out. So you can do one and the same, replicating the images between on-prem and cloud. I don't think we have that functionality in place just yet. I've been doing some reading on it recently, and it's coming, but it's not quite there yet. So you couldn't take your on-premise image and without a bit of work, put it up into the cloud and then replicate it between everywhere. But you can definitely do that for marketplace images for sure.
Sorry, I can just imagine one of my customers asking me that exact question, going, well, I still press my images in this way. How does that translate?
Yeah, you can't really press them in the same way. Our VMware's recommended approach is you take the marketplace image and then you modify that one, because we've done all the work with the agents and everything else already. We do have a process for bringing in your own image, but you have to kind of break it to then re-add it and then optimize it. And the optimization is the key part here. You can't just run the Fling optimization or the productized optimization, because the one we do in the cloud, it runs slightly differently to the on-premise version. So again, it's kind of, yes, you can, but you've got to be very careful when bringing in your own images.
That's cool. Well, thank you. Sorry, but otherwise, absolutely awesome presentation. Really good.
Thank you. Any questions?
How often do you, I know you had to mention there of subscription limits, etc., within Azure. I mean, have you ever run into occasions where you're rate limited by the APIs, not because you've overburdened individual subscriptions, but by just the general Azure variance in what they're supporting?
I haven't personally, no. I have run into issues when we do, in particular with this customer as well, we needed to create some Postman scripts to fire against the Azure environment, because we needed to be able to delete some permanently created virtual machines once they'd been finished. And there we did meet this kind of limit in terms of what we could actually do and achieve in a timely fashion. So not through the actual deployment scenario and delivering a desktop infrastructure, but definitely like day to operational wise, I've met some challenges with the API environment. It runs a bit slow. So I had to work with the Horizon Cloud engineering team, and they rewrote some of the APIs to improve the performance. So, I mean, we've done a lot of work with the engineering team off the back of this project to help improve some of the API flow, which is why in the next iteration of Horizon Cloud, you'll find that there'll be a huge improvement over what you can deploy, the sizing of it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen similar with another vendor's product, shall we say, running against Azure, but certainly at some points, because of some bizarre behavior in that tool, we were running into API rate limits back from the Azure API. Yeah,
it's a kind of point and pray. You let it go, and then you just have to wait. Unfortunately, and there's no progress bar to tell you how far it's got or what it's doing, so it can get frustrating.
Cool. I mean, do you do much with Azure Policy? Do you integrate at all with Azure Policy for DSC and things like that on the machines you stand up here?
Are you talking what, WDATP or whatever, the Windows Defender stuff, or?
Well, so I mean, if you're in an Azure tenant and you do typically you would use Azure, well, certainly for our server workloads, you use Azure policy and desired state config. And you can extend that obviously to desktop platforms as well. I mean, do you see, rather than relying on traditional kind of GPO type management?
Yeah, because at the moment, yeah, so for this particular customer, to get around that issue, rather than using the policies you're talking about, we actually implemented Workspace ONE UEM. And then for their virtual desktops, because it needed to be of a specific security stance. So we use Workspace UEM to apply all of that configuration and policy settings for a set stance on the build, and not rely on group policy objects whatsoever. Slightly different for the WVD environment, because we can't manage that via Workspace ONE UEM at the moment. We did then have to revert back to GPO policy driven approach, because as yet we don't have full support for Azure AD, just pure Active Directory, Azure Active Directory. We only have the user side support and not the machine side support. But then that brings its own challenges, because we don't have any group policy objects or OUs to deploy into. So you've got to think about starting to use those policy-based driven wizards, and we don't have anything in the horizon at the moment that looks at doing it in that manner. So something we've taken away to look at what we can do to automate that.
Do you see many customers kind of trying to complement this with Intune or solutions like that as well? I mean, because to me, the VMware Environment Manager stuff, it seemed more kind of profile driven, whereas the stuff you would push in with Intune might be more kind of system configuration driven.
Well, that's where we use UEM, but obviously we're impasse at the moment where it doesn't support non-persistent environments. Again, we were working with the UEM team to see if we can bring that in line with the Horizon Cloud and the non-persistent approach, because it's just not a supported platform variant at the moment. So again, I haven't done much work with customers in Intune. I know they are using it. I know the customer we were working with was using Intune, but they wanted us to do the conditional access policy via Workspace ONE Access for authentication and access to the entitlements for the desktops and WVD sessions. But Intune was definitely in place for other elements of the environment.
Yeah, I mean, Intune's been tricky in my experience, because Microsoft has basically rebuilt Intune over the last couple of years whilst it's driving down the road, which has introduced its own challenges for things. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Cool. So, I mean, that brings us to time for that session. So thanks very much, Michael. That was really interesting. So we've got a 5-minute break to do a kind of changeover. I don't know if we've got Brian on yet for your Kubernetes topic.
I am here.
Cool. Okay. So if you want to get your deck queued up, as I say, we've got a couple of minutes before we kick off. So if anybody has any questions, hang on for Michael, or for general questions, we'd say got a couple of minutes. Cool. Okay. So if you get your deck queued up, Brian, and Gareth or Chris, unfortunately, I've got to drop off now for a call for 30. But do you mind sort of handing over at 5 past?
Yeah. I just made him co-host, so you should be ready to go, Brian.
Great. Thanks. All right, and I'll see you all in about half an hour. Thanks.
Hi.
Mic check, cam check, and can you see presentation?
And see you. I saw you waving.
Yep,
I thought, it's not going back to him. And I realised it's all quiet.
We're 3 for 3. Awesome.
Welcome and thank you. Nice and early for you. Appreciate you joining us so early.
It's good to be here.
Good man. Good man. I can't even begin to think how much grief you're getting for your Twitter handle at the moment, but I'm sure you're doing it quite well.
You just have to separate the history and the culture from
This is it.
all the things going on. Yes.
It says literature, people.
Right. Exactly. Well, yeah, I also get, are you a Russian spy? No, even before all of the Ukrainian stuff, it was, are you a Russian spy? No,
like, yeah,
spy.
that's why I put it up there. Absolutely.
Right, yeah. Because that's what a spy would do. Right.
Oh, man, honestly. Good stuff. I managed to overlap on some of that. Right, let me do a quick push on here. Now we've got some new faces joined for the afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Brian, I'll leave you to answer Guy's nudge in the chat.
I did not know there was a YouTube channel woodworking for Mere Mortals. I got to check that out now. That's the new Dummies channel. I did not know that either.
Yeah, all right.
I'm gonna still stay with the title though. Stand behind it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Great. So we are all good for what timings have we got on this?
I was going to say, you could go now, Brian, if you want to sing. It's very early for you.
Alrighty. We will get going. So this is start here, Kubernetes for Mere Mortals, which really means this is for people who have never taken a look at Kubernetes, or for people who are just getting started. This is really, taking what I've done in the documentation of my journey for Kubernetes, and hopefully this is a new take for you if you're getting started with it, and maybe it'll give you something to focus on to actually learn it faster, which is really the main point of what I'm doing here. So very quickly, our agenda for today, I don't know that this is going to go it's probably not going to go the full hour, which you may appreciate actually. I timed this probably 40 minutes tops, but if you have any questions after the fact, then definitely that'll be a good place to ask them. So speaker introduction, a little bit about me, because a lot of the journey that I have with Kubernetes has inspired this very talk. I am all about expectations and disclaimers, what you will and won't know at the end of this. So I want to make sure that we level set on what we're doing here. And this is really a things I wish I was told before I started Kubernetes talk. So I'm really taking all of the learning and all of the journey that I've had, and I'm boiling it down into, if somebody had just told me to concentrate on these particular things, I would have learned it a lot faster. Because with my background coming into Kubernetes, I was like, I want to learn all the things and I want to learn them all right now. And Kubernetes, with the moving parts that you have there, that can be overwhelming for a lot of people. I even know a lot of people who are more well-versed in tech than I was, And it was like a real brute force thing where you just had to keep focusing in on it, keep doing it until just something clicked. That's kind of how most people's journeys go. So I want to make sure that we talk about those particular things. And they are as follows. Learning and knowing that Kubernetes is a data center in a box. Way back in 2011, that was my first VMworld. 2011 was all about the software-defined data center. Remember that? And Kubernetes is really sort of that on steroids, as it were. I know I don't want to get too down the weeds of like what really defines a software-defined data center, but Kubernetes is really a software-defined API that provides a data center in the box. And once I framed it that way, a lot easier to learn it. Next one is Bash, or I use Z Shell. That's just me, and what we would call a hierarchical CLI, and knowing what those things mean. And I'll have nice little tiny little mini lessons coming up. Containers, container images, container repos, and container networking. A lot of you might be looking at that and saying, that's like a whole class in itself, Brian. Yes, yes, it is. So I say this one because there are a lot of people who may have never built a container independently of Kubernetes and start Kubernetes without getting that portion of it or doing containers on their own. And it can be a heavy lift because really all Kubernetes, well, I shouldn't say all Kubernetes does, but it's a container orchestrator. So understanding how containers work under the hood is super important, especially when it comes to stuff like, I don't know, troubleshooting. JSON and YAML. I hear everybody's eye roll now with that topic. But one of the advantages I had coming into Kubernetes is that I did a lot of work in Ansible. Ansible is defined through YAML, sometimes JSON, depending on what you're doing. So I found that knowing that going in helped me out tremendously. And then applications concepts. Once upon a time, I was an admin, so I did a lot of running lots of different web servers, and those applications concepts can help you if you've previously done that. So those are really the 5 things that if you know these 5 things, then Kubernetes is going to be much easier for you. Another passing topic that I plan on sort of demystifying Kubernetes a little later through REST APIs, knowing REST APIs and how they work. Super important. And a couple of tools that are required for that really is Postman and or curl. Somebody mentioned Postman earlier. Kudos. And I'm going to have a demo. Now, I usually film my demos just in case, but we'll see if the demo gods are working in my favor today. And I'm going to do a very basic demo and show you some of these concepts and bring some of those home, like the data center in a box and Bash and JSON YAML and all that cool jazz. And then also, I have a resources list for you that goes beyond this talk. I have a tech blog, thinkingoutcloud.org. So I want to make sure that, hey, if you want to go beyond what I'm showing you here, I'm available there, and you can certainly do that. And then also, I've uploaded all of the code that I use for the demo up to my GitHub. So there you have it. So very quickly, who am I? I love information technology, Russian literature, mechanical keyboards, and cats. That is not my boat. Just thought it was a good picture of me, so I kept it. There's day 77 of COVID, of everybody being locked down and everything. These 2 are pictures of my cat, Percy. That's my old mechanical keyboard. I have a new one now. And then one of my favorite books of all time is Notes from Underground. Originally, my IT career started with being a tech trainer. And for about 3 years, between 2009 and 2012-ish, I taught official VMware content. I was VCI certified, vSphere or VMware certified instructor. I made the switch over to Dell That is where I really switched over from training into doing it for realsies. I started my automation journey. Automation is really kind of my jam. There, we had a fairly large infrastructure as a service healthcare cloud that Dell owned at the time. I have no idea if they still own it. Probably not. Pretty large environment, which means that we really had to start, automating all the things. So that's where I got started with. I made my first container back in 2014, which scared me to death at the time. And other tools, Git, PowerCLI, and Ansible. And now I work for a large retailer that is not Amazon. Principal systems engineer. My main two responsibilities are VMware infrastructure and automation, and Kubernetes that's coming up here. Automation journey continues there. I am infrastructure as code focused, and I'm responsible for Kubernetes, PowerCLI, Ansible, Git, Terraform, Jenkins, blah, blah, blah. I started my IT blog in February 2020, the month before. That was in the before times. And I started that with the intention of doing in-person talks. So it's nice to be here. And I am a vExpert starting last year. And I am also cloud practitioner certified with AWS recently. So very quickly, one brief aside, I'm currently learning the drums. I'm having this aside because this is talking about what inspired me to present this in this way. And there were a lot of things that people didn't tell me about learning the drums. For example, because I plan on doing a lot of like heavy metal drumming. I'm a big metalhead. And one of the things that I was told through my various online training and whatnot is that you're going to have to spend a lot of time doing some very tedious things, like focusing on your non-dominant hand speed, because you can only drum as fast as your non-dominant hand. And I sort of kind of knew that, but there are some drills that you can do. And over here, it has like these drills that you're just focusing on that one thing on the snare drum. I wanted to get to the drum kit, which I just bought for Christmas, and I wanted to just like start drumming, and it doesn't work that way. You have to focus on things, and once you focus on those things, it makes everything else fall into place. The faster you are on the snare drum, the faster you'll be on everything else that you're hitting with the drumstick. So these drills are like super tedious, like left, left, right, 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 left, left, and so on. I'm not saying that learning Kubernetes is tedious, but I am saying that there are things that you need to focus on, and I'm here to talk to you about them when it comes to Kubernetes. So that's the idea of this entire talk. With Kubernetes, you focus on the right things, you'll learn it faster. Otherwise, it can be overwhelming. Again, hey, I want to learn how all the networking works. Let's focus on some other things first, and then that'll fall into place. Usual disclaimer I have, I'm not a this is not a vendor presentation. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I don't favor or advocate one vendor over another, and my opinions are my own. I say all those things because I don't want VMware or the anonymous company I work for coming back or anybody going and reporting me for saying things. Although I should be on my best, I am on my best behavior here. My other usual disclaimer for every talk that I give is that this is a method for learning Kubernetes, not the method. I don't proclaim that this is the way you have to do it. I am simply sharing my journey with you, and hopefully some things will speak to you and maybe some things will stick, but I just found that concentrating on these things will allow for you to learn it a lot faster. To start here, introduction. Which means that if you are a Kubernetes guru, you might get something out of it. I don't know. I do have some advanced resources and a few tools listed later that you might want to try, but I just want to make sure we level set and understand that I'm speaking to people who may not, have dealt with Kubernetes or are just getting started. And like I said before, this is a I wish I'd told me that talk. This is to give you areas of focus so you can expedite your own learning. And of course, you won't be a humble Kubernetes guru at the end of this, but it is a great start, or so I hope. And another thing you might be thinking at the end of this, like, he didn't really talk about networking or storage. I am purposefully not talking about those two things. And again, I want to make sure this is very clear. I am not saying that networking or persistent storage are not important. They very much are. But those two topics alone can can be pretty overwhelming when you are trying to learn Kubernetes, right? So, I instead really kind of like giving up sort of a spoiler alert of this entire thing. Do something simple first based on Kubernetes infrastructure, sort of be okay with the defaults. Is really kind of the saying that I can say with this. And then the networking and persistent storage are things that you can get into later. If you go in and you start learning about containers, like you start taking a class on containers before you get into the more Kubernetes oriented learning, you're going to learn about networking because a lot of the networking is based on the container provider, right? So keep in mind that a lot of that stuff will come with as sort of a piggyback on these things that I'm having you focus on. So the realms of knowledge, and I know this is a bit repetitious because I brought this up a little bit earlier, but the title really of this could be 5 things to concentrate on to speed up your Kubernetes learning. Understand data center compute roles and distributed computing. The advantage I have here is that I started out as a data center rack and stack person. I racked and stacked. That's what I did. Then I moved on and up to, okay, we've got to implement this application in a redundant way. All right, so we need, a cluster of, web servers, for example. We need a load balancer. We need storage provided, and we need top of rack switches for all of this to interconnect, stuff like that. Bash and the hierarchical CLI, containers, and everything about them. Again, I have a lesson on what to concentrate on containers, but out of all of these, that's probably, if you've never dealt with containers before, that's probably the heaviest lift because a lot of what I'm talking about is interconnected with that. When you create a Docker image, for example, it's really a series of bash commands. So all of these are focused in interrelated topics to help you learn faster. But that's probably going to be the one you concentrate on the most. That's the tedious, snare drum practice is the container one there. JSON YAML and application concepts, and we'll come back to these, but these are the 5 things to concentrate on. Things that will help you if you already know how REST APIs work going into this will be a lot easier. There are a lot of free classes on a lot of these things I'm talking about as well. And there's Postman curl making their appearance again. And then infrastructure as code concepts, Git, Ansible, Terraform, etc. There are some Kubernetes management tools like Rancher out there, which is fine, and that's great. That's actually what we use where I work. That has a UI there, but in reality, if you really want to do this in a repeatable, standardized, and easy way, you typically automate the process of building clusters and whatnot. So those are all things that will help, and that's kind of like your next steps, right? So data center in a box. I wanted to avoid defining Kubernetes because just depending on where I was in my Kubernetes journey, I took a lot of intro to Kubernetes classes. This is my take on that, I guess. But I just remember going through all those classes and I'm like, if I see one more definition of Kubernetes. But here's the one that is relevant for me. This is the one that kind of allowed for me to wrap my brain around it. And this is a little reworded from the official definition from the Kubernetes website, which is Kubernetes leverages well-known software-defined data center concepts such as clustered nodes and load balancing, but rolls it all up into an easy-use API for rapid automated development and deployment of applications. That is a mouthful. But what I mean by that is that if you take the physical data center, and this is probably a topic that you may be used to with like your sort of software-defined data center, software-defined networking, software-defined everything topics. If you take what we would typically have in a physical data center, you have your physical compute nodes. You have your, I don't know if the arrow's showing up or not, but you have your top of rack switches. You just look at the screen there. You have your storage. and you have your load balancer, right? So let's say this is a clustered web application, right? You have your physical compute nodes, you have your physical load balancer, you have your physical firewall, physical top-of-rack switches, and your physical storage of whatever type. Storage could be SAN storage. If you're using vSAN, then that would be sort of the HCI approach, right? But in reality, what do we have with Kubernetes? Well, all of that could be on one machine. So really, there's this overlay of this square around that. The physical infrastructure could be one machine. I wouldn't recommend running this all on one machine in production. But all of that, that's what I mean by a data center in the box. Instead of the top of rack switches, we have the container network interface, those known as the CNI. You have instead your Kubernetes nodes, which then run your pods, which then quite honestly run your containers. And then you have your Kubernetes storage class providing what we would call persistent storage. And they even use a lot of the same vocabulary for the load balancer. In the physical world, we call it a load balancer. In Kubernetes, we call it a load balancer. And then, of course, we have a firewall, which is in the form of security policies. And you also have IP tables, which is imposed in a lot of different places in Kubernetes. So framing it this way, I think made a lot of sense for me. Granted, yes, I had some data center experience before, but you know, once I started training internally to a lot of our VMware people, they sort of understood this concept because VMware people typically understand this. So like if you want to translate this into, okay, here's my ESXi hosts, you can do that if you want, if it makes it easier for you. But that's the conceptual idea of Kubernetes. And if you have multiple clusters, and as far as like thinking about, okay, well, I want to make this stuff redundant, well, you can have physical nodes, Kubernetes nodes, if you're doing what's referred to as bare metal Kubernetes, or you can do Kubernetes across VMs, which is pretty common also, especially for using like VMware Tanzu, and which I highly recommend, by the way. Bash or Z Shell, this goes out to Windows admins who really want to get started with Kubernetes and running Kubernetes. There are multiple classes on Linux commands, many for free. Some examples are cat, more, less, grep, JQ, which is a JSON parsing tool, which is pretty common. Knowing I came into this knowing Bash as well, because once upon a time I was a Linux admin before I jumped into the VMware thing. You'll also use a command line called kubectl. Is everybody still seeing my screen? Just making sure.
Yep.
I had a glitch in the matrix over here. Okay, cool. For Kubernetes, of course, you'll use kubectl. And as of right now, this is a requirement. UI tools are not robust enough to do all the things. Now, I mentioned Rancher earlier. There are others out there. And it's a great tool, don't get me wrong. But as Kubernetes admins, we find ourselves using kubectl still a lot. Especially in troubleshooting situations. I will. I went out on a limb with that bullet. So if there's somebody out there who knows like a UI tool that does all the things without having to use kubectl, I actually want to know. I'd love to see that. Now, kubectl is also hierarchical, and what we mean by that is you have something simple like kubectl get, which is a pretty common command, versus something like kubectl describe. And the way hierarchical commands work is if you type in kubectl get and press enter, it's going to say, what do you want to get? So it'll actually list off the next part of the command, right? Versus kubectl describe and press enter, that will be different things. So each sub command that you type in is going to have another set of options underneath that. This is what's called a hierarchical command line interface, which is pretty common. Cisco uses it, stuff like that. So it's just something that you can get used to. The good news about hierarchical command lines is that typically if you type in the first two things like kubectl get and then press enter, it's typically harmless and it will just say, okay, well, what do you want to do? So that's the good news. The downside is that you sometimes have to be careful with stuff like, I don't know, kubectl delete. So, so there are a lot of things that, once you understand that, it makes things a lot easier. And I've found that if I sort of let people in on this, it makes it a lot easier for them. Containerization, Captain Obvious makes an appearance. Kubernetes is a container orchestrator. Therefore, knowing how containers are built and how they run is a must. Out of all the things that we've talked about, I would recommend highly that you concentrate. Remember my analogy of the snare drum practice. Knowing the more you know about containers, the faster you'll be able to pick up Kubernetes as a whole, because that's what Kubernetes does. And furthermore, how to build containers is also going to be very advantageous. A lot of times, as a Kubernetes infrastructure person, which is where I'm at on this journey, knowing how to build containers is becoming more and more common. And here are some use cases, wink, wink, salespeople. Kubernetes pods with Jenkins. The way we run Jenkins is Jenkins jobs are run in a Kubernetes pod that is put together by people consuming that particular Jenkins infrastructure. So rather than having Jenkins run either as a single entity, which is quite honestly pretty hard to maintain, what people do who are using that Jenkins infrastructure is they will create their own Kubernetes pods that are self-contained, and all their stuff runs in there. We do this all the time. Ansible, I have a couple of Power CLI ones that run independently in Kubernetes pods. And that means that I've got to build my own, which I do. And you also have, and again, these are things from my world. We use Ansible quite a bit. We also use another tool related to that called AWX, which is the quote unquote, emphasis in the quotes, free version of Ansible Tower. It's the dev version. And they have switched to execution environments, which run as pods in Kubernetes, rather than running as VMs within the actual AWX. Again, the power behind this, and this is kind of the idea, is that the execution environment is maintained by the person consuming AWX. Before that, you had to have the VM actually injected and set on the AWX machine. So if there was a change, then the admin had to go in and change that on the server. Here with execution environments, all you have to do is maintain the uptime of AWX as the admin, and then the devs or whoever's consuming that can create their own pods and off they go, or create their own container images. Harbor is a private repo for your pods and containers, really containers. That's a recommended piece of knowledge to have. Harbor is not the only one out there, but it's kind of the common one, especially if you're using Docker. Docker's a focus here. It doesn't have to be. As far as like container images, there are others out there. And as far as building Docker anything, the demystifying of that is that Docker build is a series of bash commands. Hey, it comes back around. Remember the bash thing we talked about earlier? JSON YAML. Outputs and inputs with Kubernetes are in JSON YAML. There are tools that'll interpret or obfuscate those. Rancher is one, but I found knowing these are a requirement, especially for troubleshooting. Here's a very simple example, and YAML is all about spaces, not tabs. Right. There's by the way, that's taken straight from the Kubernetes website and its documentation. And like I said, I had an advantage of working with YAML before I got into Kubernetes, but it's yet another thing to concentrate on that will make your learning faster elsewhere. Because, okay, here's an example. All right, so Brian, you say let's focus on these 5 things. And now I do want to go into learning about persistent storage. Well, how is persistent storage defined, particularly if you're going to put it into Kubernetes? It's defined through YAML. So all of these different things that I'm talking about are really interrelated. Applications concepts. I call it old school, but it's really still the way things are done in the more traditional implementations. When you have a single web server, let's call it Nginx, say it's an Nginx web server, how is that accessed? Especially if you're doing co-location. So you're co-locating a bunch of websites on one particular web server. Each one of those websites can be differentiated by port, by subdirectory, or by header, right? I know these are, if you've never dealt with web services before, that's probably, you know, a little, it's new to you. But even as an infrastructure person, I'm not a dev, but we do actually drink our own champagne where I work, and we infrastructure people also run our own application layer stuff in Kubernetes, like Jenkins, like AWX, right? And knowing and understanding how stuff is co-located on a web server will help you tremendously, because it's a related way to the way Kubernetes does it. Understanding ports and protocols, 100% something that you need to learn. And I guess if you are, you know, looking at your Twitter feed, at least focus in on this, because these are the 5 pieces of vocabulary also that are the first things I would recommend learning about Kubernetes if you haven't so far, right? 5 things. A pod, what is that? And it's just a housing for a container or containers, plural. The deployment, which is a redundant pod or a set of multiple pods. A service, which describes the application infrastructure. It's the pod and container info, and therefore the defining how that deployment can be accessed externally. Ingress, which allows access to web apps. Think of that as a quote unquote firewall, emphasis on the quotes, but really related to just web apps. And then the load balancer. Those 5 things alone, this is 80%, I would say as a Kubernetes admin, this is 80% of what I deal with. Sure, networking is stuff I deal with. Sure, persistent storage is stuff I deal with. But I would say that as far as implementation and troubleshooting, these are the things that are the most common that we run into. And learning those 5 things first, I think, helps tremendously. Knowing REST APIs and how they work, I can't recommend enough Postman. You know, knowing curls, sure, if you're adept at the bash command line, but Postman, I could not do my job without Postman. I can't tell you how many times I've had to go into Postman, and it's a great tool for like initially connecting to APIs and being able to very quickly like switch up and say, oh, I guess I had the wrong, token or whatever. A lot of times I do a lot of just like get so I can actually connect to the API. And then once I know how to do that in Postman, then I can do that programmatically, right? Super awesome tool. And as you may well know, you can access the Kubernetes API directly. And if you want to learn how Kubernetes really works, I don't know. Again, this is like a visual thing for me. I'm a visual person. Going into Postman and connecting, which I'm going to do as part of the demo, fingers crossed, it allowed for me to see, oh, okay, that's the hierarchy, the way Kubernetes is set up, because the REST APIs are, of course, hierarchical in nature. And then I can see the JSON output of each one of those particular objects. And it helped me to get an idea of what components really are part of Kubernetes, and allowed for me to, see things from a more holistic view. And that's not an exhaustive list, by the way, but these are the ones that people learn typically first in the Kubernetes API. All right, here we go. Let's see if the demo gods are in my favor. I've switched over to my terminal. Everybody able to see that too? Yes? Everybody?
Yeah, I can see it.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I'm using a, what are we doing in the demo? Almost forgot that. We're using Minikube. Minikube is a great tool for dev purposes. Minikube allows for you to run Kubernetes on your local machine. It is mostly a dev tool, and it's a great tool to learn the basics. As far as like learning how to do things at scale or in the enterprise, it's not a great tool. I'll say that right now. But as far as like, you know, hey, I've got this running locally on my machine and I have everything all in one place, it is a great tool for that, and great for demos as well. We're going to create a simple Nginx deployment and make it accessible. We're going to do some basic kubectl commands. And then also we'll take a look at the resultant JSON YAML as a result. So just so you know, there aren't any tricks up my sleeve. This is from the demo that I have available in GitHub. I scripted out a very simple Minikube setup. And that Minikube setup has two major things outside of the actual Kubernetes infrastructure. I've flagged it to install Ingress, and I've flagged it to install Metal LB as a load balancer. Now, again, these are things that people didn't tell me when I learned Kubernetes, which is a more enterprise, or the enterprise methodology for providing access to pods and nodes and whatnot within Kubernetes. We do this through Ingress and we do this through a load balancer, right? Ingress is provided through Minikube, has this built in, and then you also have Metal LB built in. When you are learning, on a side note, there is another sort of piece of learning you can do called Kubernetes the Hard Way. You may have heard of it. Maybe you've done it. I recommend highly that you do that. As a matter of fact, I decided to do that. The very first thing, I did was Kubernetes the Hard Way, and I don't regret it. I think I should do it again just for like the learning purposes to bring things home. But in Minikube, and you're seeing this more and more nowadays, like for example in Tanzu, where the ingress and load balancing is baked into the cake. Right, each different flavor or vendor provided Kubernetes has like, okay, here's the ingress that we use. Here's the load balancer that we use. The ingress that we're using is an ingress that is based on Nginx, I think. Yeah, ingress Nginx. And then the load balancer we're using is Metal LB. So for this demo, I just went ahead and say, go ahead and install Minikube. It's cool, but it is something I would recommend for you to do manually so you understand the inner workings of it. And you do that. How do you do that? You do that through YAML and whatnot, right? I have also served out the Kubernetes API through the local host, and that's another Minikube thing. You can also do this on a production level Kubernetes, or at least you can connect to it through the API IP address for the Kubernetes API itself. But I've made it available here. That's kind of just a Minikube thing, but the concept is still the same. So as of right now, if we take a look at starting out this, I haven't built the deployment yet. So this 127.00.18080, that's the port, and we're going to be running this locally, of course, of this deployment that I'm about to set up here. So the first command to set that up, and again, this is straight out of the documentation on Kubernetes, on the Kubernetes website. And if you want the link to this, I can give this to you. We're using an inline deployment rather than doing this through YAML, right? So we're saying, go ahead and create the deployment. We're doing a really simple one. The image is actually defining the container image that I'm using for this. And this is coming from the Kubernetes repo, right? So that's the container that I'm building my deployment off of. And remember, a deployment is a pod or a set of pods. So that's been created. Awesome. The next thing I need to do is I need to make this available as a service. So in the inline methodology for doing this, you would do this as a what's called a kubectl expose in this case. And this makes it available. So it's one thing to create it, but I need to make it available. And that's another kind of multiple step process that nobody really told me as I was going in and learning Kubernetes. So that is exposed as a service. That is something that we talked about earlier. And now that we have the deployment created and we have the ingress in, we have the load balancer in, and now we have the service created, we should see that load here. Thank goodness that worked. I did this like 100 times and make sure it works. But yes, this is indicating that, okay, we are actually serving out the application through Nginx. It's available now. It's available through all of the various infrastructure that we've literally set up through that. Last command, I want to do a kubectl get. This is going to get the deployment of hello minikube 1 in this case. And -o is output. I want to output this in YAML. So this is bringing home a lot of those things that we've talked about previously. And there you have it. This is very, very common. This, as far as like, okay, hey, what do Kubernetes admins do? Well, especially in troubleshooting situations, they're going to be doing a lot of this. Kubectl describe is another one that they use that we use a lot of, but you know, metadata annotations. Further down, they tell you what the image is or the container is, right? So this is the container that's running, right? So, so there's that. And then the last thing is looking at this visually through Postman. So this is on a different port, 8001 in this case. And here we can visually see, I'm just doing pods here in this case. I can see what pods are created. Here's the one we literally just created as part of the deployment, the Hello Minikube one. It's brand new to the Kubernetes API. This is literally looking at everything that, well, at least the pods in this case. We can also just, you know, back off a little bit and we can see all of the different resources, which is what the way it's referred to in Kubernetes. And we can see, well, everything. We can see config maps, we can see endpoints, we can see events, which is kind of the logging, right? Namespaces, which is something I haven't really talked about in this talk, but that's another sort of aspect that you'll learn through Kubernetes itself, which is the organization of all these various clusters and whatnot. So I think, I don't know, this is something that really helped me. I hadn't seen really people show the actual API, but it just, I think it really helps to bring stuff home as to how Kubernetes actually works. Resources available after this. Shameless plug for my blog also, I guess. But I wrote a 5-part Kubernetes series, which is how I learned Kubernetes. And for me, it was pretty common. I shared a lot of things with some of the other even more, you know, seasoned Linux admins that I you know, a lot of my Linux admin buddies. It can be overwhelming, and a lot of times it's just, you just have to keep learning and learning and learning and learning, taking classes until it just clicks. In part 2 of that, I list off all of the things that I studied, all of the things that I went through that finally led to my breakthrough. And the one thing that I cannot recommend enough is Kubernetes in Action. This is the one book for me, which also has a repo with scripts in it. That's the one that really just kind of brought stuff home, and it started to click, and I started to get it because it went through and did, you know, those 5 things I just mentioned. And quite honestly, a lot of what I'm telling you here is inspired by that. The 5 different, you know, major things to talk about, or the 5 different major things to focus on. Went through all of those: pod, deployment, service, ingress, load balancer. All of those things were really sort of covered first in all of that, and very simple YAML files that allowed for you to create that pretty quickly in pretty much any Kubernetes environment. It was really nice. And also on top of that, all of it worked, which is also a plus. Some of the tools we talked about, we've got Minikube. The first quote unquote real Kubernetes implementation I did is Tanzu Kubernetes Grid in the community edition. I don't think it was called that because this was a while back at the time, but the community edition is free. And that is really a much more quote unquote real world implementation, where you see how, okay, you're using a VM template to build it. You have to bootstrap the actual cluster. You will start looking at things like cluster API and whatnot, which is the way Tanzu Kubernetes Grid is implemented. And that's where I sort of got my real introduction to more real world Kubernetes. I recommend it highly. Docker, kubectl, and then there are a couple of tools that I use, which is kubectx and kubeNS. I didn't really cover those in the demo, but those are tools you can use to very quickly switch between Kubernetes clusters, or what is referred to in Kubernetes as contexts, because you typically are responsible, or at least we are, for multiple different contexts or multiple different clusters. So being able to switch very quickly through using something like kubectx and kubeNS is the same kind of concept, but switching between namespaces, which is also pretty common if you're an admin. So yeah, if you have any questions, I am at RussianLitGuy on the Twitter, or there's my personal email, brian.solons@gmail.com. Thank you. And any questions?
My mind's blown. That's much of a question, surely.
Okay.
What's Kubernetes?
Let me go back to that slide.
I have a slide. Thanks, Brad. That's really good. What I did manage to catch of that looked great. So I will be watching that on the replay. So in the closing slides, I'll have the links to all the YouTube channel, but obviously we've recorded all these sessions. So yeah, I think it'd be great to catch up on some of that stuff there.
All right. Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Going international now. Yeah, I love it.
Cool.
For making the time.
So we've got a 10-minute break now to rearrange the room and switch back to the other, move the partition and do all the stuff that we usually have to do in this slot.
Oh man. We've got a half past, I think, right?
We do, yes.
Yep. Yep.
Now I have to turn my video on again. Cool. So how's everybody enjoyed it so far? So we've got one session left.
Save the best for last.
Yeah. Have we got the town guys? I see Matt's there actually.
Got Matt. We have got Paul. I think we're waiting for Ian to join.
Okay, just a bit of logistics. Do you guys know which one of you is going to be? Have you got slides?
I've got the slides, so I'm sort of I'm comparing, moderating.
So next slide again, Mr. Next slide, please.
Good news is there are only 3 slides, so even
Chris is going to be like Bamba Gascoigne, I think.
I thought it was a bit more Chris Whitty, you know. So.
Well,
next slide, please. Next slide, please. Very good.
And I am going to apologise for the most drabbest background ever. I'm in a hotel room in Sheffield. I rushed back from a customer meeting to set up. I don't even know what these curtains, not from IKEA, trust me. I've shot the tripod and a camera, so it is awful.
Nice
to be fair, that's how I like to think of Sheffield. Yeah.
Well, no, exactly. I'm going out. Entertaining after this as well. So.
Going out.
They said that working, yeah.
For Leeds, it's much better.
I just have a very messy room.
Paul, have you got a really wide camera on yours?
Yes, I have.
It could pass some big screen.
Yeah, I'll try and see if I can sort it out.
Looks like you've got it on the wall of a stadium somewhere.
Yeah.
No, it's
like looking out at the people in the pitch.
No, it's because Paul's Nickel. He's an Ickle Paul.
6'5" isn't little.
I was about to say, in all fairness, if you were stood in the middle of me and Paul, you would be the odd one out. I will guarantee you. Yeah. So.
Oh, look at the tallest getting all up in it.
I know we are a bit, aren't we? Yeah. I'll get back in my box. It's okay.
Getting all feisty in Sheffield?
No. Do you know what, Linda? It's been a rush. I was up at 6 to get here. I've been in meetings all day. I've been given a by Yanis to leave early because we've got workshops till 5. I've rushed across Sheffield and I've set a mini office up against the most drabbest curtains in the Mercure I've ever seen. It was like, my God.
Don't you know I need a background?
Exactly. If the problem is, right, if they open the curtains, it's really sunny, isn't it? So the sun's coming through.
And worse still, you see Sheffield. So
Yeah.
It's all right, Chris. The full Monty was filmed here, apparently. Yeah.
In your hotel room.
Put it one way, I want camping green around. So just out of interest, before it starts at half 3, is the intention for the next one to try and be in person? That's
absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, we were hoping we were going to do this in person, but it was just getting a bit too risky with the times we had to book for. So 7th of July, I think we are back in London, is the intent, back at Tech UK.
Brilliant. Okay.
And then November for the UK event.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant.
At Space Centre, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
We're all still here.
We will be.
It looks like Ian joined.
Yep. I think we've got everyone, so we're ready when.
What was the date for the national summit?
We don't have one yet, I don't think.
Oh,
You think we know?
Simon just said it. I'll have to watch the replay.
No, we did. So it is booked. I would confess that between the 4 of us, none of us can find the date that it's booked for, but it is booked for a date in November.
I was just about to ping Jo Bagley's EA, because if we booked Jo, then she'll know, but she's actually presenting the IDC session that I'm watching on my mobile. I pretty much figure I shouldn't do that. I've just seen she's got do not disturb on and realise she's the one whose screen I'm looking at.
It should be after VMUG. That's all we know, and sometime in November.
It's one of those that it's going to be a Thursday in November, and it's not the same week as VMworld. So,
I've tried every combination of VMUG UK of Space Centre into my inbox, and I cannot find it. But I know we did it.
We definitely did it. So either the 17th or the 24th. So book all of those. Both of those days and those Wednesday nights. I'm going to see what I can find. We must have done it end of last year then.
Just it's nice to book a hotel room in advance. It's so much cheaper when you book it like 6 months in advance.
Well, should we get going a little bit early then?
You mean ahead of schedule? This is unheard of.
That's
good, because then I can go entertaining then.
You go and hit the pub, did you say?
No, I wasn't saying that word down. I was entertaining, yes. Socialising.
It shows how much more efficient your life is when you have a TAM in it. So, we're ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
Let's kick off 5 minutes early. There you go. Let's set a new precedent.
Yeah. So.
Hope that entertaining isn't the full Monty though, Dave.
Marvelous. Right. Let's got the screen up. And now for something completely different. Throughout the day, we've had some really good technical sessions. Obviously, we had Duncan's, and we've had some in-depth ones on Cloud Foundation, and we've had a great session on Kubernetes, and we had the end using one. What I noticed of those sessions that quite a lot of the presenters had the job title of TAM, and not everyone's necessarily sort of come across that. What is a TAM? I've been one myself, and I've joined by a few more on this sort of mini panel, really, to talk about what it is, how you get into it, what happens when you do get into it, was it a good idea? and many other questions besides. So start with a few introductions, really. As you haven't met me before, I'm surprised, but you should have. My name's Chris Dearden. I'm currently not a TAM. I've actually become a channel SE again for a security company. But I'm joined by Ian. If you want to introduce yourself briefly.
Yes, thanks, Chris. So I'm Ian Sanderson. I'm a technical account manager at Island Cloud. If the accent doesn't give it away, I'm based just outside of Newcastle.
And Matt.
Howdy all, my name is Matt Crape. I'm a senior TAM that works for VMware. I'm based out of Toronto area of Canada.
Dave.
Hello. So this is, as Chris said, something different for me because I'm generally presenting on mental health actually on the VMUG, so this is a bit different for me. So Dave Marley, I'm a senior technical account manager at VMware. I'm based in the northwest of England.
And last but not least, Paul.
Yeah, hi, my name's Paul Robinson. I'm also a senior technical account manager at VMware. Unlike Dave, who's up in the north, I'm based down in the south on the sunny coast down in Weymouth.
Fantastic. So we've got a few sort of main points that we'll chew the cud over initially, and then I've got a couple of questions and a few wild cards of my own. And really starting off with, how do you become a TAM and what is it really? That sort of job title, technical account manager, job titles can mean and do lots of different things, but how did you discover about it, and what did you learn it to be, as it were? I don't know who wants to take that. I'm not going to point it to a specific person to start with.
I'll start then, Chris. It's quite funny. Absolutely no idea. If I go back to, so I've been in VMware about 6 years. Before that, I was at Fujitsu. Well, it was ICL and Fujitsu for 21 years. I started as a graduate. Lots of different roles, from techie manager to I was a principal architect in R&D for the last 6 to 8 years. Actually, Chris, when I met you, when you worked for another company a long time ago, I did have TAMs from different vendors, but what I will say, they were very, very light touch type of TAMs. So I didn't really have any idea what they were. And then I seen a job that became available at VMware, and I just applied for it. So no idea going back 6, 8 years.
You went in pretty blind to it.
Absolutely. And it's quite funny, if I go back again to when I looked at the job description, I still have it because I'm sad like that. I think it was quite woolly at the time. I only started to get my head around a little bit from the interview process. And then even then, when I got offered the job and took the job, I'll be honest and say I jumped into the job role completely blind, and it wasn't what I thought it was. And that's not a negative, by the way, that's a positive.
Yeah, I think it's potentially one of those roles that different companies will interpret in different ways. So my first exposure to someone who had that job title was, I was working for Deloitte many years ago. And there was a guy who sat in the US office who was paid by Microsoft, and he was a TAM. Not entirely sure what he seemed to do, but he seemed to be pretty happy about it. But they weren't particularly technically involved. Yet, if just to look at the caliber of some of the sessions we've had today, it's obvious that quite a lot of TAMs are very technical. So I suppose I started to look at it as that mix between a technical role and a more relationshipy, talky, hand-wavy sort of role, without going down the marketing route. So still directly involved in customers, rather than, I suppose, there's some of the roles which are a bit more R&D type based. I don't know if anyone else had a similar experience on that.
Well, I just want to echo what you've both said there, especially you, Dave. So my background is, the roles I've had previously, they've all been very technical, been like support services manager, delivery consultant, technical pre-sales. I just got to a point in my career where needing to know the nuts and bolts of how something works just wasn't for me anymore. Now, I'm not saying that I don't enjoy that, but like really like knowing registry settings to tweaking things out, it's just not that much of an interest. But yeah, I came across the TAM role at Ireland. I was like, okay, I wasn't looking for it, but I looked at the job description. I was like, oh, I've done that, I've done that, I've done that. Let's have a shot at it and see what it is. So yeah, I guess I've just stumbled across the role, and now here I am.
Excellent. Matt, Paul, anything to add?
I was going to say mine was a bit opposite. Actually, I didn't stumble across the role stumbled across me. I initially applied for VMware as a senior consultant within PSO. So I went through all their sort of joining, sort of process for interviews, which you have an hour-long technical interview on the telephone, then through to actual interview with what would have been my line manager if I'd gone with PSO, which involved doing a presentation, then a full whiteboard session, then following an interview at that point in time. At that point in time, I didn't have that much customer-facing experience because I'd been an internal designer at a large retailer. So at that point, I didn't get the job. But 2 months later, I got contacted by the recruitment within VMware to ask if I wanted to go for the TAM role. And of course I did, and I haven't looked back. Yes, like Dave said, the role's slightly different. It's Ian has said as well, it's still technical, but we're not hands-on. So it's you don't have to know stuff in depth. But yeah, so that was my journey. It was slightly different from the other two. Funny enough, I did have a TAM when I was a customer. And I now actually work directly with my TAM now because he's moved on into a different role within VMware. He's been here about 12 years now. And I work quite closely with him on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I'll just pipe in with my experience as well. I come from the customer side, or I was kind of started off tech support, did sysadmin, eventually moved to IT management. So it's still fairly hands-on, but one step removed. It's a little less technical. I had staff for that, but I'd still dabble on things. But I didn't really know what TAM was. All I knew is, hey, that sounds pretty cool. You hear about TAMs here, you hear about TAMs there, especially around VMworld. You hear about TAM Customer Day, for example, but I didn't really know what that was. I knew a lot of folks who worked for VMware. Some of them were TAMs. A role opened up in my area, and a friend of mine, a lot of us might know him, Ariel Sanchez Mora. He's like, hey, dude, you've got to apply for this. So applied for it. Didn't really know what I was getting into, but at the end of the day, I've always enjoyed helping people in some form or another, and that seemed to align with what the TAM does. I think one important note to touch on is, at least at VMware, we're post-sales in the sense of we're not there to necessarily drive the sales process. We're not commission-based or anything like that, but rather we're really there to help the customer get the value out of whatever they do purchase from VMware, and maybe open up the door to new technologies and all that sort of stuff. So echoing some of the other points that were made, we're not necessarily super deep on the technical side, as in, we're not the engineers from the R&D side of things, but we do also interface with them a lot. If it's a matter of bringing requirements back to them, or sometimes it's just a matter of, hey, need a roadmap session, depending on how deep you need to go, absolutely, we could deliver that for you.
Can I just reiterate what Matt said? And it's a really, really important point. What he just said about the fact TAMs aren't sales, or generally not. Well, they're not in VMware. Some organizations they may well be. I think that goes and helps tenfold with customers, because sometimes customers, look, end of the day, businesses are there to make money. Customers are there to be successful. But sometimes, obviously, customers think, oh, where's a salesperson trying to sell something? Just again, that's not the TAM, because we're not, we don't get paid on sales. We've got nothing to do with sales. Yes, we want our company to be successful, and we want the customers to be successful. I think that helps tenfold with the relationships we build with customers.
Yeah, just building on that, Dave, that was something that kind of steered me towards this role as well. Once I came across it, I probably could have gone down the sales route, but I didn't want to become a full-on salesperson. You're right, there's that trust that you build with the customer, because you're not there to ultimately sell something. Yes, you might identify a post-sales opportunity, but then you hand that off to the relevant person. It is about helping the customer at the end of the day.
Something that is sometimes worth bearing in mind is that a TAM is often a paid for resource, and can be included, if a sort of a enterprise licensing agreement has been set up, that may well include a certain amount of TAM resource, or TAMs might be allocated as a almost to a premium marquee type customers. So yeah, I think they're very much almost on the cost rather than revenue generating directly side of things.
And Chris, I think that's another valid point. And I think that's why when you asked the first question about, why do we become a TAM? As I said at the start, my experience of a TAM, they weren't paid for TAMs. I got them as a bolt on to Product X that I'd purchased when I was at Fujitsu, whereby now, as you've just said, TAM is generally, I'm not here to say it right across the business, but generally across VMware, and obviously where Ian is as well, it's a paid for service. So it's very, very different. And as I say, the little tiny chunk of add-on you get when you bought Product X or Software Y. Yeah,
they're sort of, depending on where in the business the TAM is attached, very often they are part of the customer success organization, so tangential to support, for example. But other organizations, I've seen them more tangential to sales, and TAMs I've come across them where they are measured on their account's performance, the retention of that account and the growth of that account. Not necessarily that they only get their variable part of the salary if the customers grow, but if a customer leaves, particularly as we move more to subscription-based licensing models, it's very important that a customer continues to use the product. So if they stop using the product and you have a way of helping them, to maintain that customer retention beyond day-to-day support resources, that's where I've seen the TAM model made use of without it being a paid resource, because it does essentially pay for itself once it's been, if they are effective in keeping customer retention. I think obviously VMware's moving towards a subscription-y type model, and as a services provider, I'd imagine Ireland is doing something pretty similar with that, Ian.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess where Ireland maybe differs a little to VMware is my customer base is split into two camps. One, it's a bolt-on attached to a service it's purchased, but also those are the customers that we deem would be a good fit for a TAM as well as a value-add bolt-on. Well, I'm a bunch of value-add to that account to help with that retention. You're right. So the way I like to look at it is I'm an extension of whoever that customer's team is. If I think something's a good idea, I'll say it is. If I think something's a bad idea, equally, I'll say, I think that's a bad idea. Have you considered this? It's impartial advice as well, from my point.
Yeah. So whether you sort out the TAM life, or whether, as in Paul's case, TAM life sort you out, and you've joined up as a technical account manager, how did the reality meet up to the expectations in terms of what you needed to know, what you needed to do, and the types of people you needed to interface with?
I think it was a shock, being honest, Chris. I will personally say, and everybody's got their own little journey, because my understanding what a TAM was quite woolly. I'll be honest to say, I don't really think and it wasn't a bad move, by the way, I think I've made a good move. I don't think I grasped how varied the TAM role is. If you look at the analogy of wearing different hats, and we all do it on a daily basis, I think I've got a wardrobe full of about 1,000 different hats for different customers. And every day you put a different hat on so many times, it's unbelievable. I think the TAM is a major mix of and these aren't weighted perfectly, by the way, of technical, business, strategic, and lots of relationship elements. You know, I didn't think the town was such a go-to person. And yeah, I think it was a massive shock to me. I'll be honest and say when I joined 6 years ago, I think I'm going to say the word overwhelmed. And that isn't in a bad way. Firstly, VMware's a large company. The product set, look, before I joined VMware, I thought I knew VMware's products really, really well. How wrong I was, being honest. On my first day, I think I fell off my chair. And then I think I soon learned that we don't need to know everything. We just need to be able to articulate a good proportion of it. We have a massive, you know, there's a big team supporting the TAM structure, you know, towards our customers. But yeah, massive shock to me. And whenever somebody joins within our team, the first thing I says is don't get overwhelmed. So yeah, big shock.
Yeah, as a techie, you know, we want to be able to see all the nuts and bolts and know where all the various bells and whistles are. But to actually sort of tone yourself down and realize that as long as you can understand the nature of a question or a problem that the customers come up with and understand enough about the organization to get the answer. So you don't have to know the answer yourself, but you do have to know where to get it from.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, VMware just is a large company, and I think one of the best attributes of a TAM, I suppose, is the customers to realise we're the interface into the business. Unfortunately, it takes a bit of time to know the right people to go to, but you get there in the end.
Yeah, top skill set of being able to search Jira and Confluence to find stuff. I think that's probably the best skill that any TAM can have is, can you find stuff in Jira that's actually relevant?
Yeah, it's true.
I'll echo a lot of Dave's thoughts as well. In that it sounds cliche, but no two customers are the same, and some of them might require, let's say, a lot more hand-holding, which is fine. You know, they're paying for the TAM service if that's how they want to use it. Great. Some of them might be very hands-off and say, we'll call you when we need something. Okay, if that's what you want, if that's what keeps the customer happy, great. You know, we have deliverables that we try to deliver. You know, a lot of customers see tremendous value in them. But at the end of the day, I sort of take the approach of I am what my customer needs me to be. And that could vary from week to week, from day to day. Sometimes they might need me to put some extra pressure on support, or sometimes it's just, you know, even being the middle person from them to support, say, hey, we don't want to be on the call for 4 hours with the customer. Let me hop on the call with you, you know, tech support, and I'll relay what we've done, what problems we have, and what the business impact is, right? That's one of those things as TAMs, we're really there to help understand the customer, their business, and so forth. And when they open up a ticket with GSS, for example, they may not be apparent what the actual business impact is. So we add value there. Other times it might just be a matter of, hey, let's take a look at your license usage. Maybe you're paying for more licenses than you need. So it's really about trying to find the value. The customer doesn't always necessarily know where they need that help. And, you know, as TAMs, we're really there to kind of, you know, mold and shape ourselves into how can we help bring you a lot of the value.
And just from my perspective, just to frame the TAM role facing inwards back to Ireland and kind of where that role sits and who I work with. And I believe the same could be said for VMware, is the teams that I interface with certainly are the sales team, the solution architect team, the dev team, the product management team. You're gathering all of these, I guess, metrics and feedback from those customers who you're helping with their day-to-day challenges, and feeding that back into the organization as, you know, maybe is this how we could improve a product, or this isn't working quite right on our portal. Dev team, can you have a look at this? Or, oh, hey, look, there's an opportunity here maybe to flip the customer to a better product that would suit their needs, better to the sales team. You know, it's you get to touch every part of an organization that you work for, I believe, in the TAM role. So it's quite good. It's varied. And as Dave said, many hats to wear for many customers as well.
I mean, like you said, it's many hats to wear. You're like Dave also mentioned, and Matt, you're the go-to guy. That's not just for your customers, but that's also the internal teams as well. So yeah, you've got at first initially it's like, whoa, well overwhelming, but it's over time you pick it up, it becomes second nature, and it's not matter building relationships with your customer and different from one day to the next. It was totally different going from being somebody that's sort of doing pure techie to then going, it's more about relationships as well as the tech. So yeah.
So when you're trying to sort of work out how to manage a customer, and whether they're going to be a customer that is going to require a lot more contact time than others, how do you measure or monitor their engagement? Do you look at support tickets? Do you look at if you've got metrics around if there's any SaaS products involved? Do you look at SaaS metrics to see, well, actually, they're logging in every day, they're using the platform pretty heavily, or is there something else that you use as a metric to work out how much engagement to give a customer?
I mean, that's a hard one, actually, Chris. Wasn't ready for that one. I'm not here to say this is all pre-defined.
I was going to say, Chris. So my customer's a dark site. It's a large dark site. So I can't, like you're saying, using metrics and stuff like that, I can't. So it's building those relationships with the customer. It's ensuring that you've got regular contact points for the customer and going through how they're, what are their pain points, what does their roadmap look like over the next month, year or so, and keeping those regular contact with the customer and going in and making sure they're hitting those milestones that they said. So unfortunately, my customer is not going to use SaaS. There's no metrics that I can go in and look at. So it's just building relationships with the customer and having regular contact with the customer for themselves.
Have you managed that over the last couple of years? Because assuming as a dark site, that makes
it's been difficult because obviously with over the last couple of years doing things over the internet, there's some conversations that can't be had. So it has had a bit of an effect on my relationship with the customers. I mean, now that things have opened up, then things hopefully will get back. I can go on site now. And like we said before, I'm actually sort of in some of the business areas that I'm dealing with in my customer that I'm seen as part of their team. I have a laptop, so I can be on their systems, so I can get emails. So I have that externally as well. During the last couple of years, and also pass to walk on, to go on site to see my customers. So it's all about maintaining that relationship and them knowing that you're there if they need you as well.
I think, Chris, following on from what Paul said, I've had a bit of a think now, actually. I think one thing to understand, because look, metrics are metrics. Paul has just said a real good one about relationships. I think communication is key. And don't forget, right, a customer has invested quite heavily within the TAM service. It's not cheap. And what the TAM and the customer wants is a common goal. And what's that? That's a successful customer. So I think moving on from what Paul said is communication and outcomes and measurability. Because when I sit down, I've reviewed with all my customers, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, generally quarterly for bigger reviews. But we have key achievements that we want to achieve together, basically stuff that's achievable. There's no point writing a big whiteboard of lists of things because it's not achievable, and it is generally 2 or 3 points. That's manageable because at the end of the quarter we have a tick in a box and we know what we've achieved. Sometimes that doesn't happen and that rolls over to the next quarter. So I think we can get stats. I think communication, it's keeping that channel open, and Paul's just alluded to a really good one, what you've just described over the last 2 years with the pandemic. I work in the financial industry, so my customers are generally financial ones. It's been very, very difficult. However, we are opening up again and going on site, as you can see today, with me being in a hotel room. So communication and relationships, I think that's how we measure things.
Okay, awesome. Let's put the shoe on the other foot and think about the TAM from a customer's perspective. So, for those that aren't a TAM, and you may have access to one, or you may have listened to some of this and thought, actually, that might be something that could be of any use. What is that direct value to a customer? What can they get out of having a TAM other than an invite to an extra meal at VMworld?
I think the key word with this is that the TAM is an investment from a company, and it's about long-term relationships with customers. That's what they're going to get out of it. If they think a TAM's going to come out and change the world in 3 months, it won't happen. One of my customers I've had for 6 years, doesn't matter which, again, financial one. To me, it's long-term relationships. It's me helping them drive their business, because in turn they drive VMware's business. For instance, they drive the TAM business.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, and going back to what we were saying prior to this, communication is so key, and it's important to set the expectations, right? We're not just going to walk in and start doing stuff. No, we need to understand what it is that you're trying to do and why, and we'll help you achieve that, right? We really try to become an extension of your team and work towards that common goal to make you successful. So yeah, we have a bunch of things that we can do, whether you're looking for best practice reviews, you want roadmap sessions, absolutely, we could do that, but none of that is of any value if it doesn't go towards what you're trying to achieve. So, putting my customer hat on, if I had a TAM, I think the way I'd get the most value right off the hop is have a regular cadence. Don't expect to necessarily hit the ground running, but make sure you develop that, relationship, that cadence, be able to say, here's what we're trying to achieve. Make sure the TAM understands why you're trying to achieve it. Are you trying to be, number one in your business? Are you trying to give people better customer experience? Relay all that stuff, because it really helps us as TAMs know where to focus, right? And that could come back to, hey, okay, you want to be better with customer support. You're having a lot of vSphere issues. We can see that from GSS, and we can help you get better uptime on your critical app systems that service your customers. That might be one way to bring metrics. Maybe it's a matter of you need better features. There's a feature request that would make your life easier. As a TAM, it's important to understand, once again, that business aspect of it. So, not to sound like a broken record, but, communication is absolutely one of the most important things, to build a healthy relationship with a TAM.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the magic words of feature request, and particularly, and I suppose to an extent that this does apply to VMware as well, because there are certain aspects of the VMware portfolio that are evolving faster than others. And if you're making use of those, and there's a feature that you want as an end user, and you have access to a TAM, your chances of getting that feature to happen just went up. Because you're going to have
dramatically gone up. Yeah.
I mean, unless you've got Duncan Snapchat, it's probably going to be a little bit easier to go via your TAM.
Chris, actually, sorry, one thing to add with that is, if that feature request that customer X has just mentioned, as soon as we start discussing it within the TAM organization, I'm telling you now, customer Y would have actually had the same conversation, and you'd be surprised. Lots of customers all think pretty similar.
Yeah.
And you've got the power in numbers for that feature request.
Yeah, absolutely. And because when you're trying to persuade product management, if you can say, well, my customers that represent this much of our portfolio, they want this feature, and it's going to have this much impact, it makes it very, very easy from a product management perspective to go, right, when I'm picking my features, which ones am I going to do? Am I going to do this one, which is going to please exactly one guy, or am I going to make all of the TAMs happy, and by extension all of their customers? It becomes a bit of a no-brainer.
Yeah, and just going back to your metrics conversation before, I mean, I think VMware has the same. So we track those in AHA as ideas. I don't know if VMware uses that as well. But yeah, you can build that case up to say that all of these customers wanted the same thing, more or less. Product team, can we do something about it? And as the TAM, you are the customer's voice to articulate why it's a good idea to introduce that. It'll make their life easier, it'll make our lives easier, makes everyone's life easier. Yeah, it's all good.
Okay, cool. So, whilst we're talking that sort of guide, how to use your TAM effectively, what's a few things that people shouldn't do with their TAM? What is a TAM not used for?
We are not a direct replacement for, global support, for example, right? We can definitely assist, help you do troubleshooting, and even help you get SRs open and all that sort of stuff, and tag along for the journey. But at the end of the day, going back to what we were saying earlier, we don't necessarily have that deep skill sets or the training. More importantly, we don't have the same tool sets available to a lot of our support folks. I've been through some, pretty rough cases, long-standing SRs, and through that, I've developed some great relationships with a lot of our tech support folks, and I've come to learn some of the values and some, gain access to some of the tools that they use internally. So sometimes I'll ask them, hey, open up an SR, upload the logs, I'll start taking a look while we get a TSC assigned, right? But at the end of the day, I'm not, drop-in replacement for that. I can help ease the process somewhat, but I think that's a fairly common misconception that we might see when the TAM role isn't necessarily explained to its fullest when we go through, let's say, the original sales process.
Yeah, I think salesmen will say pretty much anything to get them to approve. Yeah, we'll throw in a TAM. They're like your on-site support. Actually,
no comment.
For legal reasons, that may or may not have happened.
I think the reason that happens is it's a double-edged sword, because as Matt's just alluded to over support, because the TAM is such a friendly face and an extension of the customer's team, they want you on board within the support request, which is fine. But as again, Matt alluded to, we don't have the technical savvy to be able to do what GSS do. But it's good, but it's bad in another respect.
Yeah.
Okay.
And,
So
to that point, I think any other role that we mentioned throughout this as well, like I guess tech pre-sales, although as Matt said, we can ease those processes, we are not a replacement for those, because I mean those people in those roles are usually commission based, and you don't want to be stepping on people's toes doing that kind of role either. So you've got to be mindful of that on both sides.
Although, if you're helping someone else earn commission and you're not getting paid on it, then they're normally quite happy for you to do that kind of work.
Well, there is that side, yeah.
So what is it? Is there such a thing as a typical day in the life of a TAM? I don't think there is. I think it's definitely a job where no 2 days are the same. But if you could create a typical day for a TAM, what would it consist of?
Well, I'll start. I mean, the start of my day is just going through those support tickets for my customer base, just make sure there's nothing lingering or nothing's blown up overnight that I haven't noticed. Keep ahead of something that might come my way, be proactive about it, and go back to the customer on it first and foremost. But after that, it is completely varied. I mean, I might be helping out with a health check for a product, or cadence call, looking at roadmap session, or building out quarterly business review decks, resource consumption, being that escalation point for support ticket. It's different every day.
Yeah. Anyone got any other sort of interesting sort of parts of that day in the life of a TAM? Obviously, modeling curtains in Dave's case.
I think the worst thing of the day, being honest, Chris, is waking up to an inbox, and that's the truth. I think, unfortunately, the last year, two years with the pandemic, I think we've just been mandated and dictated by calendars. Unfortunately, our inboxes are probably 10 times what they used to be. Again, look, today I'm quite lucky within the team. Well, the UK TAM team. I'm one of the ones who's travelled, like Paul as well, actually, a good portion of the pandemic. While a lot of people have still not seen customers in 2 years, I've been reasonably consistent. So my day-to-day has included travelling, walking up the stairs 6 times to get 10 people from VMware into a building. And we've been discussing lifecycle patching today, for instance, and design of a new lab. And that's not a typical day, but that's a day of doing something completely different. What Ian's just said, it can be a lot of meetings, by the way. People, if you don't like meetings, it may not be for you sometimes. But cadence design meetings, just the list goes on.
The one thing that I can never plan for is when I start going down the rabbit hole, and I'm sure a lot of the other TAMs can relate to this. I'm not even talking about chasing people down or anything. It's a matter of, I wonder how this feature request is doing. Chris, going back to what you're saying earlier, you open up Jira, for example, and it's like, it's tied to these 2 other ones, and you start going down those. And next thing you know, you're in Confluence looking at roadmaps and upcoming features, and here you are 2 hours later, and you haven't, you still don't know the actual status of that original feature request that you were looking at. So it's very, very easy.
You've seen some great mock-ups on for the next series of products.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, it's that's always an interesting bit. But so out of that day in the life, if there was something that you could change and you could not do about that day in the life, what would you change?
Ooh. Back-to-back Zoom meetings would be
mandatory coffee break in between.
Mandatory coffee breaks. Back-to-back. Yeah, I think this last 2 years I think there's people are going to have to change going into the next couple of years. Yeah, the way that people work is going to have to change. I mean, that's both as TAMs and customers. Back-to-back Zoom meetings is.
It can be pretty tiring, and until they invent 70-minute hours where those 10 extra minutes are untouchable. I
think, Chris, I think it was Matt who said before, and change, I'm going to say shape instead of change, is the support thought about what a TAM does. Because yes, we do get involved with support cases. Yes, it's fine to do so, but sometimes they can be very consuming, and sometimes we're just somebody sat on the sideline while the TSE, technical support engineer, is doing the real meaty work, but the customer still wants us there, and that's fine. But I think sometimes you do end up as a little bit of a spare part when that time could be doing something more, more beneficial. I get why the customer wants it to happen. I think that's one of the things I wish we could change. Now, I've been in the business 6 years. I still haven't changed it, unfortunately. I tried to educate, but unfortunately, it's that friendly face and that friendly nature and that extension of a customer's team that they feel that there's a warm feeling that they've got their TAM involved, and that's fine. But I wish we could change that.
Yeah, I'll echo that in that it's unfortunate that quite often when TAMs get involved, it tends to generate, at least and quite often, a better experience. Sometimes it might only be a perception of a speedier experience. So it's one of those, you're doing a good job, here's more work for you, right? So that is a little bit of a drag. My initial answer is going to be, I wish I had a little bit more predictability in my day, in that, perfect world, yes, we've got all those Zooms back to back. Okay, at least I know what I'm doing for the day. It's when things go off the rails, right? Whether it's you get these surprise meeting invites show up, or there's some sort of customer emergency, and the emergency is not always a production down. It could be something like, hey, our legal team just realized we're not properly licensed for this. We need to get this resolved right now. And you're saying they're thinking, I'm not legal, right? Why are you talking to me type thing? So if I could choose one thing, it'd be, hey, here's my calendar, and that's actually what my day looks like every day.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll finish off with a section a bit about the TAM role as a career choice. Why might you want to become a TAM? From your current position. So, first one, do you think the TAM is actually no? I'll change my question to that's one I want to ask very last. What do you see the evolution of the role and the value of being a TAM in terms of career progression? So going beyond TAM life, should you consider being a TAM as your next role, or actively look at TAM roles?
So I'll give an example of something I just had not considered at all. So I mean, everyone on this call is in some way, shape, or form focused on VMware, and I guess we all get hit up on LinkedIn for various roles. But having the TAM role associated with your LinkedIn profile, you see a whole host of other types of roles in completely different industries as a technical account manager. So, that's not something I ever considered, but I'm like, oh, actually, that's quite interesting. If I ever want to leave this space for some reason, I know as a TAM, I'll have that experience to apply somewhere else and, change career that way. So I think it's a good leap pad for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of additional transferable skills that you pick up from being a TAM, which if you did want to pivot, not necessarily completely industry wide, but to maybe another aspect of the same industry, that those transferable skills can help be that pivot point.
Yeah, absolutely. I find myself regularly talking to VPs, CEOs, CIOs, CTOs, like all those senior leadership folks. And obviously we're not talking super deep technical stuff, but at the same time, through this role, I've been able to help kind of bridge that gap and understand, okay, why do you need these specific technologies to make you successful, and how do they make you successful? So I've been able to develop that sort of intermediary skill of being able to talk to the tech folks, the operations folks, if I need to, being able to talk to, the senior leadership folks. And, as somebody who's coming from a technical background, being able to talk to the senior leadership folks is an invaluable skill. Going back to career progression, that really does open up the door to other things. You take a look at a lot of CTO type roles where it's like, hey, here's a really cool technology. I understand it pretty good, maybe not at the full operational level, but I see how it could be applicable to our business and how it could be a game changer for us. So I think that was one of the biggest takeaways that I've had from the TAM journey so far that I would have never even considered when I started this.
Okay. And we are almost out of time, so we'll go for some closing statements of, would you why did you would you choose the TAM life for someone else? Would you choose it again if you had a do-over? So we'll start round the table with Dave.
Do you know what, Chris? Yes, even though I didn't know I have a clue what I was applying for, but hey, you know what? It was worth a punt, and I think I made a good gamble. What I will say is, me becoming a TAM, I didn't have a great deal of field-facing skills before I joined the TAM, even though I presented internally okay. If I hadn't become a TAM, I don't think I would have ever presented at any of the VMUGs, UK, Northwest, London. So yes, you know what, if you want a varied job, something that's different every day, lots of skills, technical, business, strategy, architectural, relationships, communication, it's definitely worth applying for and thinking about it. One thing I will say is a takeaway: you need thick skin. You need good soft skills. You've got to have good communication. You've got to be able to build relationships, not just business, at a personal level as well, because that's how you make things work with your customers. However, the TAM is a venting board for customers. So some days can be a bit heated. It's never personal. It's only business. You need to be able to have thick skin and accept sometimes you should get a bit of a moaning at you because things do go wrong.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dave. Paul?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like like Dave said, you've got to have all these different personas as well. You manage your own time. That's the best thing I like about it. It's not, you're not going to the same desk every day. It's a different customer every day. It's a different challenge every day, and it's a rewarding career. I mean, seeing your customers succeed, especially following the advice that you've given them, it gives you a great buzz. And I can see myself being in the TAM role for a considerable amount of time, perhaps until I retire, which is not far away.
I'll hold you to that. I'll hold you to that, Paul. Yeah, that's my
Cool. Matt?
I've had really no regrets taking the TAM role. I think it's been a huge boost to my career. Unfortunately, I probably have more time, work time left in my life than I want. Will I be a TAM forever? Who knows? But I think it's absolutely opened the door to so many different areas, whether I want to go back into deeper technical side of things, whether at VMware or somewhere else. I still kind of have a hand in that pot, so to speak, whether I want to go more so on the business side, like I was mentioning earlier, CTO, CIO, all that sort of stuff. If that's something I aspire for, I think this role has absolutely given me skills to progress that way as well.
Brilliant. Finishing off with Ian.
Yeah, well, everything that's just been said is true. The thick skin, certainly, the soft skills, technical skills. I mean, the TAM role, personally, I found is what you make of it. I think one of the other advantages that we haven't touched on is you have the ability to get hands-on with anything that the company sells or distributes. I don't know if that's the same at VMware. So if you want to, you can still keep hands-on with the tech, which helps you to move back into a tech role if you wanted to do that. Being empathetic helps as well. Just appeasing those people who are, having a rant in the ear. But as Dave said, it's never personal. The next time you talk to them, it'll be all smiles and laughs and everything. It's just, these things happen. So, yeah, I think it was absolutely a great move. I think, as most people on the call have said, that I found them, or we kind of stumbled across it, not really thinking about it. But I would certainly consider it, especially if you've been in like a support role or a deep technical role. Maybe as you want to come up for air. So I mean, I've been in support, and I know what the constant drone, bing, 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 support. Look at these tickets is like. You don't realize how stressful that is until you come away from something like that. So, if you're finding yourself in that situation, maybe a little burnt out in your current role.
That's a very, very interesting observation, Ian. I mean, as a support person, you only ever hear about the dark side of the moon. You're only ever spoken to when things are going badly. Whereas as a TAM, you have a bit more of an opportunity to see what happens when things are going right. And that, to me, I think is quite a reward, because you actually get to see, it gives you a more positive opinion about the products and the company you're working for, because when you work in support and things aren't great and you're getting hammered with tickets left, right and center, it can give you a bit of a negative opinion about the company's products. Whereas when you're actually seeing success and you're seeing those products doing what they were intended to do, it's a very different psychological approach.
Absolutely.
And with that, I think we've hit our time. There's been some really good, seen some engagement in the chat. I don't see any specific questions, but let's open it up and see if anyone's got any things that they wanted to add or.
So I got one. So if I'm a VMware customer and I don't already have one, where do I go to buy a TAM?
So Sam, if you're a VMware customer, you'll have an account team. Or come and speak to me. There you go.
There's a website called Tambay. You just bid on it.
I'm being slightly facetious. I work in large organisations, so I'm very familiar with that, right? But certainly for customers that are maybe not quite so large, or maybe fall into some of the smaller industry verticals. I mean, do they still have the ability to call on a TAM, or if they want one, can they buy one?
Yeah, so I'm quite unique in the UK, Simon. I have the MSP stroke VCP partners. So I have a couple of them that are small. It doesn't matter who they are, but very small companies, and we're talking tiny. They will have a partner manager that is aligned to them, because that's how they pay for their VMware products as well. From Point Systems, they can just go and request to go and have a conversation about a TAM. So I do have two of them, and they're very, very small slices, basically. So it doesn't matter what you are. If the customer can invest within the TAM, then they can have a TAM, as far as I know. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Your A and SE is probably the easiest way.
Yeah.
They'll be more than happy to get you a TAM. That's all I'm going to say on the matter.
Well done, Gareth.
Yeah, from my standpoint, because I mentioned in Ireland, it's quite often a bit more of a value add than a paid for service or a slice of the pie of your time. There are some occasions where we'll step in, it's not an account that would typically be aligned with a TAM, but if it's just to explain something or give a demo of a product or something like that where I can help out, then absolutely I'm going to jump in and help out on that. So just another one of those many hats.
That was very interesting. All right, thanks everybody. Have we got any other questions for the folks before we wrap? I think I've just noted on the agenda we've left the final slot as having half hour. I can promise you I'm not going to talk for half hour with the closing slides. So have we got anything else? Any other questions before we kind of move on to close out?
I should say great session. Hopefully something else can follow up it another session, because it sounds like a lot of people are interested in becoming a TAM or that kind of a lifestyle.
What we should do, Gareth, we're all back at VMworld in person. We can do this in person as long as somebody pays for the plane tickets. I'm up for it. Yeah.
If you
fly overseas.
I'll get the villa again. It's fine. We'll all just crash
Cheers,
somewhere.
Gareth. I knew you'd come to the rescue. Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan. Yeah,
so if someone was interested in a TAM role, presumably the VMware careers site is the place to go looking.
So Simon, just for instance, there is actually 2 roles on at the moment on the career site for the UK. Reach out to me. It's better for me if you apply via me. Yeah.
No money involved whatsoever.
He's got the.
No, joking aside, there is. I think there's 2 active roles on the career site. Go on the career site. All the information's on there. Yeah.
Before either Dave or myself, you can always.
Before I got the job at Motorola, I did actually see a job and apply for it, because it was a Horizon specialist, and I didn't even get an interview. I just got a rejection email. So
keep swimming, Andy. Just keep swimming and apply via some at VMware. I think it helps. I can say that.
I had a sponsor. I had a sponsor. It's a TAM that wasn't on. It's not on this call, but yeah, I had a sponsor. But yeah, I didn't even get first base. So I went, well, I meet the technical requirements, and I was looking for a change in career. So never mind.
You're on a blacklist. That's what I'm saying.
I could be, yeah. I think they couldn't afford the freebies, basically.
That's probably what it was. Yeah. They have to look in your free tap budget. Right. With that in mind, could someone just flip me the sharing ball for a second, please?
I wonder what we're going to flip you. Sorry, I was going to.
You can flip me whatever you like.
Yeah, you should all be good to go now, Simon.
While I'm doing this, you can all take the piss out of my hair, because that's mostly what we've done all day anyway. Right.
Some people are jealous. That's the problem.
See, use it where you got it. Right. So this hopefully is going to show a PowerPoint deck. My Zoom skills have moved on. Right. So this is very brief. So thanks everybody.
The wrong edition, Simon. You're sharing your wrong screen again.
Am I doing it again? You thought I'd have figured out how this stuff worked by now, wouldn't you?
You need a TAM?
Yeah. Can you work Zoom? Tired. Why is that not doing it then? Why do you do that?
Do we know anyone that can work Zoom?
Is that just sharing? Is that
Next
sharing?
slide, please. Next slide, please.
Right. You should have some slides, hopefully.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Right. So thanks everybody. was really good to see some people. So apologies again, it couldn't be in person, but the intent really is the 7th of July will be our next meeting, which we are intending to do at Tech UK, where we have done all of our previous, at least for the last 3 or 4 years, London VMUG events. So date of the diary, Thursday, 7th of July for that. The UK VMUG events, so again, we will be back at the National Space Centre because they'll only let us move our bookings so many times, I think now. So we are still trying to track down the exact date, but it will be a Thursday in November. So it's probably the 17th or the 24th. But if you put that in your diary, keep an eye out, and we'll there will be a mail coming out to people on the mailing list once we get dates firmed up and details. But obviously there's a fair bit of time ahead of that. So best place to keep in touch is really #London VMUG or #UK VMUG Twitter handles. We all keep an eye on that. Failing that, email. And the VMUG.com website will have the events once they're actually posted and up for bookings. 2023 dates, I think, probably is a little bit ambitious right now, given all the hassle it's taken to get to this point. But all things being well, we will continue the same pattern. We will try and maintain 3 London meetings plus 1 national one. Obviously, this year we've only really had 2 London meetings, so this one plus the next one. But next year, I hope to get back to the normal pattern of 3 + 1. For anybody who hasn't seen it, this is that tiny URL /UK VMUG video will get you to our YouTube channel, which will have the recording for today once Gareth has done his magic, chopping the video up, etc. It's also got the recordings from, I think, pretty much all of the remote sessions that we've done there, as well as the videos from the Crossroads Inn, or wherever it was that we did the UK VMUG last year, and all the previous UK VMUGs going back probably about 10 years worth of session recordings there. So it's worth checking out. There's, the tech, as I said earlier, the tech may have dated, but there's quite a lot of soft skills sessions and things in there that are still actually quite up to date and interesting. My perennial please, we are really, really, really keen to hear from people who want to come and speak at one of our future events. We can do all kinds of different things. It could be a panel like we've just done there. We can do 10-minute slots if people don't want to commit to doing a full kind of 45 or 50 minute session. We're fairly flexible. So if you've got the nubbin of idea, just kind of get it on there. It enables us to get back in touch with you and try and work out the logistics and try and get a date scheduled. So it's really just about, the topic and at least a rough idea of what it is that you want to do. We can provide all kinds of coaching and dry running sessions, etc., to help you get there. Even if you're not the most confident presenter, we can certainly do our bit to try and help you get there. With that, I'd like to say a very big thank you to all of our speakers today. So I think if we can give them a round of applause, those who are remaining on the call. It always seems a bit odd to do this over Zoom, but everybody's doing that. And with that, we're at the end of the day. So if you want to hang around for a bit, grab yourself a beverage of choice and turn your webcam on. A number of us will be around for a while. I've got to shoot off in about 15 minutes, but other than that, we'll be around.